Takes a second.
I thought that book said who needs gay boys for a second.
That's a very homophobic title in a gay bookstore.
It says who needs gay bars.
Which could also be interpreted as homophobic, but is.
I read it as, yeah.
Okay, actually, I'll just be loud. So welcome everyone to the launch of Murray Out of Water. Hey, 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 by Tracy. Happy to welcome Taylor to the Bureau and happy to welcome Nicole back to the Bureau for, oh, I'm cutting my head off. Headless person talking, for what I think is your third time here.
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome
Always,
back.
always a great time.
So thanks for coming out today. The Bureau is, I'm one of the founders. My name is Greg Newton. My partner is Donnie Jokum. And this is a project that we founded back in 2012 on the Lower East Side. And then we've been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. And our regular bookstore hours are 1 to 7, Wednesdays through Sundays. And then we often stay open late when we have events such as this. Because we are an all-volunteer bookstore, we are in the business of asking for donations on a regular basis. So I'm going to pass this around. If you're able to throw something in here, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. If you'd rather support us by buying books, that is a wonderful way to support us. There's also a Venmo link if you'd like to donate on Venmo. And those of you online, if you'd like to donate via Venmo, you can do that at BGSQD. There's change in here if you need it, and we appreciate whatever you're able to give. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, or those of you online at our website. Oh, I forgot, I'm wearing the t-shirt. bgsqd.com. And then you'll get a newsletter every other Monday about our upcoming events. And it is rainbow season, so we have a lot of events coming up. And we have a brand new exhibition, which is actually a collaboration with Dyke Plus Art House in Philadelphia. Juno Rosenhaus, who is the founder of Dyke Plus Art House, collaborated with the photographer Lola Flash to put together this wonderful show. They did an open call to Dyke identified, lesbian identified artists over 40. And this is the result, which is a really beautiful show. And we're really thankful to Juno and to Lola for putting this together. I think those are the main points. I'm going to read now a land acknowledgement before I introduce our readers and a call for a ceasefire. And as I've said in conversation with some, if you want to talk to me about the ceasefire call, the language in it, I am more than happy to talk. And I'm a nice person. I think, you know, I try to be nice. So feel free to engage me in conversation if you like. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-Native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that today, May 24th, is the 231st day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate, permanent ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the occupation, in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of desperately needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. So our readers today, Taylor Tracy writes books filled with humor and heart that explore the joys and hopes of queer kids, focusing on mental health, found family, and the importance of a sense of community. She lives in New Jersey with her family including a fluffle of mischievous rescue bunnies. New word. And loves everything her home state has to offer. The best bagels, pizza, and beaches. Ooh, boldly saying it. New York.
Get thrown down.
When not writing, she could be found down the shore, in the rock gym, or next to her growing pile of books to read and love. And Nicole Melleby, a Jersey native, Jersey's in the house, is the author of highly praised middle grade books, including the Lambda Literary Finalist Hurricane Season and ALA Notable Children's Book, How to Become a Planet. She currently teaches at the Farley Dickinson MFA Creative Writing Program and lives with her wife and their cats, whose needs for attention oddly align with Nicole's writing schedule. Thanks, cats. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hey, thank you for having us. I'm very excited to be here with Taylor to celebrate Marie Out of Water, which is your debut. And I think you were going to read some from it. Did you want to kick it off with some reading?
Sure, and thank you so much for being in conversation with me. I think you were one of the first people to read Murray before I sent it out to see if it would
I read very early.
end up in the world.
So it's been exciting watching Murray grow and then the end product.
So I'm going to read a few poems just to contextualize for people who don't know what it's about. It's about a 12-year-old girl named Murray O'Shea who has ocean magic and lives down the shore with her family. She has magic to cope with the fact that she doesn't quite fit in with her family, and she's very sad about the fact that her brother left 2 years ago and hasn't been in contact with them since. And when a hurricane hits the Jersey Shore and destroys her home and community, she spends some time in upstate New York with family. And while she's there, she meets a new community of people to lift her up and help her get her magic back. So I'm going to read a few poems just to kind of give you a taste of the different themes in the book, namely her love of the ocean, her magic, and then the beginning of her transition when she goes to transition to a new school and community in upstate New York. Happy place. I fly through the kitchen after school like a seagull soaring over the sand, searching for an open bag of chips. Past my baby brother Sean, sucking his pacifier, slapping his chubby hands on his tray. Past my perfect sister Kelly, still in uniform, plaid skirt, navy polo, and gray knee socks, frowning at an essay on her laptop. Past mom slicing juicy apples, who scowls without looking up. No running in the house, Murray. Act like a young lady, please. I roll my eyes. I'm no lady, but slow to a speed walk upstairs to my corner room with a view of the sea. I peel off the uncomfortable pink blouse and skirt mom bought me when we went school shopping at the Ocean County Mall this summer. Pull on my favorite blue one-piece suit, stiff from summers of salt. I bound downstairs, burst out the back door. Mom's voice, nearly lost in the wind behind me. No swimming without lifeguards, Murray. Out back, our back deck stairs descend right onto the beach. The ocean is our neighbor. The ocean is my friend. I wiggle my toes in the cool sand, giggle at the salty wind tickling my cheeks, grin at the dark smudge of the horizon. The light blue expanse turns violet where sky meets sea, spread out in front of me like we live on the edge of the world. I take off towards the water, my happy place. I feel free. Family ties. Low tide. My name is Murray, my great-grandma's last name meaning from the land by the sea. High tide. Sometimes I think Mom would have given me a less special name if she'd known the person I'd come to be. Low tide. We live on the beach in Lavallette, New Jersey, in the house my mom grew up in. I love flip-flops and t-shirts that go to my knees. I collect sea glass and facts about ocean animals. High tide. I'm 12 and Kelly is 17. I miss when the gap between us felt more like Barnegat Bay, not the whole Atlantic Ocean. We used to make sandcastles and tumble through the waves. When Kelly was my age, she drifted away, suddenly into mani-pedis and makeup, hanging out at the boardwalk with her friends, but telling Mom and Dad she was going to the library. Now she's a star student, ace of academic challenge team, captain of Donovan Catholic's cheer squad, and I'm her freaky little sister who speaks to the sea and spends her time learning about the ocean. Rip current. No one talks about my brother Patrick. He left for college 2 years ago. He never came back. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Then and now, songs of the sea. Underwater, I hear a symphony of dolphin clicks, seal grunts, whale songs that no one else can. I didn't hear the music of the sea until 2 years ago after Patrick left. Maybe because of my new loneliness, maybe because the ocean was consoling me, maybe because I was so hurt, so angry, a new piece of magic unlocked. The first time it happened on a crowded summer afternoon, I dived beneath the surface and heard what I heard, the nasally trills of dolphin melodies, the hoarse but muted barks of seals, the long echoing calls of whales. Everything was so clear. The ocean already has sound, a low rustling hum, a sort of watery static. But this was music, new song, a new genre, unlike anything I'd experienced before. As far as I know, I'm the only one who hears it, which feels special and sad all at once. Sometimes what I want more than anything is someone who can share my magic. For now, it's just mine. So Murray has magic, and then there's rumblings about a hurricane that's imminent in the background. So this is the hurricane. I tiptoe past Dad, napping on the couch on one of his rare work from home days, my eyes drifting to the TV. For the past week, all anyone at school, at the Ben Franklin store, at the Seaside Heights Boardwalk has talked about is the hurricane. Down the shore, we're no strangers to storms rolling off the water, crashing into us with wind, rain, thunder. Most of the time, hurricanes stay offshore. Smaller, weaker tropical storms bully the tide. But for the past few years, we've had too many close calls, too close. A hurricane can change a place forever. The adults whisper that it reminds them of the one that hit when I was a baby, the superstorm that wiped out bridges, homes, shops, rides up and down the coast. I don't remember the storm, but I see the shadows of it in the worried glances of my teachers, parents, neighbors. Last week, the storm was supposed to go out to sea, but the model on the Weather Channel has inched closer, closer, closer to us. If the hurricane comes, it will be on Friday. Today is Wednesday. I swallow hard. How can a bunch of computers and pretty news people predict what a big storm will do? It can't hit us. It won't. And then just one last one to give you a sense of what Murray's life is like when she goes to spend time with family. And this is called Miss Oli's classroom. You must be Murray. I'm Miss Oli, like guacamole. Welcome to my 7th grade ELA classroom. Miss Oli is all smiles in a ruffled sundress and a pastel cardigan. I freeze, wondering if I turned into coral anchored to the floor. She introduces me to the class, ushers me to an empty desk near the front. Miss Oli discusses our next book. Rebecca says, when you reach me. I've seen the blue and yellow cover on the shelf in Blake's room, alongside Goodbye Stranger and the list of things that will not change. She explains they just finished A Wrinkle in Time and asks if I read it. I nod. It's one of Patrick's favorites, and he read it aloud to me when I was little. Settled in my seat, I look around and lock eyes with the boy sitting to my right. Dylan, the boy from the roller rink who dances in his skates like a leafy sea dragon. Everything about Dylan is a loud splash of color, from a new electric blue streak in his hair to the sparkly purple polish on his nails. A rainbow and a treble clef are embroidered on the chest of his acid-wash jean jacket. In the ocean, color is communication. The vibrant hues of peacock mantis shrimp, the groovy red and white stripes of lionfish, the disco floor light show of cuttlefish. In the ocean, bright colors mean stay away. I am dangerous. You don't want to eat me. Dylan reminds me so much of my brother in those months, weeks, days before he left. He smiles at me, whispers, "Hey, it's so cool to see you here. You too. It is buoyant to be seen."
I like had a first question prepared and then you started reading the passage about, the hurricanes, and I live by the beach, and we actually just have a picture from Hurricane Sandy on our wall, because that was such a crazy time for us. But thinking about Murray and what that hurricane does and represents, I think that, I wanted to pivot a bit and start my question by asking you, you have this hurricane, this moment that kind of forces her into another situation, another home, but it's not just the physical distance and the loss of the house and having to go to a different place that throws her off in the midst of all this. So I wanted to maybe have you talk a bit about, all of these feelings that is going on, that displacement that Murray is experiencing?
Sure. So Murray's 12, so she's like on the brink of puberty. So there's kind of like a time clock she feels too, where like she doesn't know quite who she is yet, but she has a lot of anxiety and worries about like this transition from childhood to adulthood. And I think that's something we don't often talk about, that it's not always like an excited or like welcome thing. It can be scary, regardless of what your identity is, and just worrying about that. In addition to just her feelings that she has towards other people, about herself. And part of the displacement too is losing her brother and kind of feeling this sense of distance within her family's relationships in the wake of him not being there. She talks a lot too about how like her older sister and her used to be close, but then her older sister became more into like super girly things. She was the freaky little sister. And she also has like a new baby brother who's kind of taking a lot of the attention away too. So everyone's kind of like been isolated within her family structure as well. So when the hurricane hits, it forces all of them to spend a lot of time really close together and kind of reconfigure their relationships and figure out how they belong to each other. And then she's forced into like a new school, which is very different. And if you're used to a very small school where everyone knows each other, and then you're forced into like a bigger school where you actually have to change classes and kind of like a new vibe there. So using the storm as like a physical form of displacement, but then kind of like exploring her internal feelings of struggle within her family and her community and how that changes between New Jersey and New York.
And then, kind of going off of that, I had a student, shout out to Diana if you're watching, but I have a student who did a whole paper on childhood as lore and all the idea that, when you're a child, you have all this particular world and all this particular stories that you build within it. And then all of a sudden you shift and grow and change and you're somewhere else. And for Murray, I feel like Murray's kind of like childhood lore is their specific experience on the beach with their magic. And they're not only pulled away from the beach, but you have all this magic that your passage that you read that, it's special that it's just Murray's, but also it's sad too, that it's just Murray. And I was, wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the magic and kind of why that was such an important element to put in the book. Because, it's its own kind of, it's its own thing throughout the book, that's very much Murray's, and later on we find out, is that a spoiler? Did I just?
No.
Okay, I was like, am I allowed to talk about Dylan's magic too? So, to tell us a bit about why the magic and why it was important for you to include that in what otherwise is a contemporary middle grade.
So I really like the idea of like having like contemporary plus books or like fabulism, where you have like contemporary book that's like otherwise completely normal, and then there's like one or two elements that make it like slightly off. And I think that's a really fun way to play with genre and kind of emotions and feelings. So that was part of it. I always like stories that do that, and that was something I wanted to aspire to in my own writing. So Murray has ocean magic, and then she meets a boy when she stays with family in New York who has music magic. So he's able to hear like all the songs that he likes to hear. He has kind of like an internal radio, like he'll be listening to music at school throughout the day, and Murray's able to tune in because they're on the same frequency basically, where they're able to kind of share that during the day, which leads to a lot of hijinks and moving seats around in their English classroom. And I think that was a great way to use a magical element to kind of exaggerate and play with something that you see in contemporary life, where two kids who maybe share similar struggles with their identities, similar feelings, and exaggerate it to where they both have this like magical ability that helps them cope. And I think it's very common to cope with music and something pop culture-y. And it's very common if you live near the shore to cope with the amazing natural world around you. So I wanted it to leave it open to readers whether you think their magic is real or if it's just two kids connecting over something that they're using to cope with bigger issues that are going on in their lives.
Going off of that, the craft thread that we're on, Taylor read us these poems, so it is a novel in verse, which means the whole story is told in poetry, but it is a novel, beginning, middle, end. Why a novel in verse? Why was it important for you to tell this story in poetry instead of prose? And were there any challenges with that? Was there anything that you wished at points that you could just be like, oh, if I could just write this out like a normal paragraph? So talk about a bit about that process.
Sure. So I never thought I was going to write a novel in verse, and I definitely didn't think a novel in verse was going to be my debut. They were always the stories I gravitated most towards in the library. Like I grew up loving Sonia's Zone, Sharon Creech, like the very like fun classic like novels in verse about identity and girlhood and all of that. So I didn't think this was going to be a type of writing that I did. I don't really consider myself a poet at this point. So I was working on it, and I kind of had it where Murray was a poet and wrote poems, but the bulk of the book was in prose, and I kept getting stuck and just couldn't find progress. And I had been reading a lot of novels in verse that had come out recently. This was when like Starfish came out. I read Everywhere Blue. I'm trying to think a few others. So middle grade novels in verse were having a little bit of a moment. I was reading more of them and thinking, maybe this is something I could do, or at least it's worth giving it a try, of putting what I had written of Murray so far into poems and playing around and seeing what would happen. I had another book on submission, so I was kind of just sitting around and waiting and trying to figure out what I was doing with my writer life. So I did that, and then I ended up writing the draft in about 3 weeks. It just helped the story click, and it's almost like it needed to be in that format completely for the story to work. And I think what made it work is that it's such an internal story about Murray's feelings. But I think just like the very like movement of poems worked well with the things that she was going through, and it helped me find the voice and kind of push through the rest of the story. So I do want to continue and do novels in verse. My next one's going to be in prose, so continue to write both styles. But I think when I have ideas now, I have a sense like, is this something that's going to work better in prose, or is this something that's going to be better in verse? When you can have these building blocks and kind of look at different topics and move around a little bit more. I like the idea that like writing novels in verse feels like playing with Legos, where like each poem is a brick. When you put all the bricks together, you get a bigger picture of something.
I think kids, why middle grade novels in verse are having such a moment is because it's great for reluctant readers. I think that when you say this is a book of poems, kids are like, whoa, but then you kind of just like, you have to open it and be like, no, it's just a regular book, but look how much white space there is. You'll read this so quickly. I love that. And so they like gravitate to that. So I think that's great. And so from that, I'm going to ask you a question that I get all the time, which is why write for kids? Like, why did you choose to go middle grade? This is your debut, and I know you had been always focused on YA and middle grade. So, what drew you to that particular audience?
So I was a library kid. I spent a lot of time at my local library, and I think I am one of those people who is like, I spent so much time in books and stories were my friends as a kid, and I want to make those friends for the kids of today and kind of pass on the knowledge I've learned, write entertaining stories for them. And kids are just such wonderful, like entertaining people who see the world in such a fresh way that they're great people to write books and stories for. I think they're a lot more open than adults. And like, I've started to read some lit fic and I really do enjoy it, but like, I love kid stories and I love the whimsy and hope and fun and heart that you get to imbue stories with in that age group.
I was talking recently with my students again about how, so I teach at Fayette Fairleigh Dickinson, and it's a program that has adults and nonfiction and also kid lit. And I was having a conversation with them about how when writing for kids, you have to think about your audience in ways that adult readers or adult writers don't really need to do. And for, you and I, we both write specifically for, queer kids and queer books. So kind of thinking about that and thinking about the audience, was there anything that you particularly wanted to set out to do with that audience in mind? Was there anything that you changed along the way because you were thinking about that audience, or anything that you wanted to make sure you did, or, anything along the lines of that, really?
On a funny note, I always have to do the math when I start writing a project of what year my characters would have been born.
Yeah, we're writing the middle grade books now are Generation Alpha.
Yes.
We're not writing for the Gen Zs anymore.
Yes.
We just realized that the other day. And I'm like, oh my God.
And then I just have to like sit with that for a while and like, okay, like what references are we gonna have, and if they're into older things, like where did they learn it from? So like that's part of it. Like I always want to make sure I'm writing to the actual kids of today and not to my own childhood, because I think that's an easy hole to fall in and feel comfortable. So I had started writing this book in 2020. I had been reading a ton of queer middle grade that came out in 2018 and 2019. There was a huge boom of it, and so many great books and authors came out of that time period. And I kind of noticed some trends where there was a lot of queer middle grade, which is great, where it had a happy ending where the parents would ultimately be accepting, where like they would have one conversation and then they would be accepting. And I noticed I wanted to be able to kind of fill gaps in the market or try to write towards the kids who might read that and find that alienating or isolating. So writing a book where Murray's mom might not come around at all by the end, or like if you have parents who aren't going to come see the light, but how can other adults step in and be allies for these kids who really need it? Because I think it's very common to tell kids like, oh, if you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling lonely, if you're having a problem, ask adults for help. But I don't know if the adults always know what to do. So I think writing for kids, you're also going to be writing for the adults around them and giving them a toolbox and a kit to kind of think about how you can be allies for the kids in your lives, even if they're not yours, and do right by them. And also give like an honest story of how to find hope in these more difficult situations for kids who are experiencing these issues. And also just kind of letting the identity be very open. I don't think I use really any identity terms in this book, and that was very intentional. It makes it hard for queer book bloggers to put it on lists for things, because it's like, well, like where do they fall like under the queer umbrella? And I don't have an answer. Like I couldn't even tell you. I think in a few years Murray and Dylan might know more about themselves, but at this point letting kids have the space to kind of figure things out and be in that messy middle and not have to know exactly just to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I think Winnie was my first one where she actually is just like, no, not like I'm a lesbian, but that was very important for Winnie. But I also purposely like to leave them open because I think that kids today, they feel this like pressure to pick a label too. And, you know, I think it's great that they know these words and then have them and can, you know, find something to call, you know, what they're feeling. But I also want them to be able to like have that space to like be messy and like figure it out along the way too. So I love that element of Murray. There's just so much that we could talk about with this book. So what was your favorite? Who was your favorite? Because you have some really great secondary characters. We talked a bit about Dylan, Patrick. You know, she does have this whole family. She has, you know, end up staying with even more family. All the teacher, like everyone else. So you have like this very well-rounded cast, and some are more important to Murray and relationship-wise than others. But who was your surprise favorite, or who did you end up, you know, really leaning towards enjoying writing?
So in the early drafts, it was definitely Dylan, who's this kind of like friend that she meets who becomes her best friend. And he was always just like a very like fun, quiet, like sarcastic kid who you'd have to write someone like fun and easygoing who would be like, okay, you have ocean magic, I have music magic. Let's prepare for this youth roller rama together. So he was very fun and I liked writing his arc. I also loved writing Murray's older brother, because I think that's such a tough situation where your family's not a healthy space for you, but you have this younger sibling who you love and have to like let go for 2 years and then figure out a way to have a relationship with them again was really interesting. But in edits, as I was working on, actually Kelly was my secret favorite. She was definitely a lot more one-dimensional in early drafts, but kind of figuring out like what she was experiencing in the family as this like very straight, like very like perfect sibling, and like how is she experiencing things, seeing her older brother kind of leave the family and dealing with seeing how her parents treat Murray and seeing her kind of fall apart after the hurricane and decide she doesn't want to be the perfect sibling anymore to an extent, and seeing how she grapples with those feelings in the wake of the storm was a really fun journey to go on.
I think that's what's so compelling about your whole family dynamic is that you have these well-rounded, like the siblings are all, you know, maybe except the baby's a well-rounded baby, but oh, you have all these like really dynamic siblings that all speak to a different experience, and they're all real experiences and they're all valid experiences, I think. And that was something that when I read the final draft versus what I had first read, Kelly stood out to me too, because it was just really compelling to be like, okay, like this book is clearly written for your audience, the queer kids, but there's characters that can speak to anyone who picks up this book who can then also relate to Murray in other ways as well. So it's maybe they see themselves in Kelly, but then they can understand Murray and the family dynamic as a whole. And I think that that was one of the absolute strengths of this book. Thank you. It's time check. Does anyone have any, I could keep talking, but if anyone has any questions, we would love to field them. Yes, Brianna?
Hi. I love the idea of contemporary plus, so I'm curious how you maintain, like, it's pretty obvious, I haven't read the book yet, but it's pretty obvious in the beginning, she's on the shore and had this close relationship with the ocean. How, when she gets to the city, did you manage to continue pulling that in as a writer to part of her character and part of the plot, and keep that and maintain that when she's kind of pulled out of her usual space?
Sure, so as a Hail Mary, she brings a bottle of ocean water with her. And initially, she's able to like keep like hold of like some of her magic, because it's like Murray has traveled before, like she's never lost her magic completely. It's not until she sees the damage that the hurricane has caused and is like, oh no, like I've been betrayed in this way I didn't think was possible, that she loses her magic. But then of course, like I needed someone else with magic to come in and be able to help her. So that's where Dylan kind of came in. And kind of thinking about like how his magic would work. And it was really funny. We worked on like developing his magic and bringing it out more. So his uncle owns a roller rink, and there's like a broken jukebox at the roller rink, and it's not really broken. It's just that Dylan's magic sometimes interacts with his jukebox, and like random music will start playing. It's like in the background, you'll see like the uncle trying to like fix his jukebox, but then you know that it's really the magic going on. So finding really like whimsical and fun ways to tie the magic to the plot and what the characters need, instead of it being just this random thing. But I do love surrealism, and maybe I will get there one day.
Thank you.
To follow up on that a bit, you mentioned that, you know, is the magic real? Is it just the way that these kids are coping? And to you, is the magic real, or is it just?
I'm always on the side of believing the magic's real. I think that's part of the magic of storytelling, in a way, is to, this can be possible in this world. It doesn't have to play by all the rules of reality.
It's funny because for me, when reading Murray, I believed the magic, but I always tend to like the other side better, where it's like, you know, because I think that there's also power in creating these make-believes and like using that to cope and getting it through. But for Murray, I completely believe that these kids they're living their best lives with their magic right now, and I wanted that for them. I think that's what it really came down. I wanted it for them more than usual, I guess. Any other questions?
So both of your books, Winnie and Murray, the characters are reading other books that have queer characters. You have more classics, and then hers has kind of both, but mostly the newer contemporary queer middle grade and YA you worked in there, and Winnie's reading some classics. So I was wondering if you guys could talk about that and why you included it, and like how you chose books.
Yeah, I can answer this real quick because I actually just answered this somewhere else, so I know I have this answer ready. So for me, I really wanted Winnie needed to stop feeling so isolated and alone. And so I wanted her to have, not only she has generational queers in her life, so she has her mom's best friend and then what ends up being the elderly neighbor next door. But I also wanted her to have kind of that same thing going through books, because that was always really important to me. So, you know, the first book that she reads is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. She reads this in the Senior Citizen Book Club that she happens to be a part of. And so that one for me was important because then she ends up watching the movie and is very betrayed by the way that the movie kind of took out the queerness. And Winnie has been forced back into the closet for the time being in the summer. So she kind of sees that parallel. So that's why I chose that one. And then, you know, throughout the book, by the end, the neighbor who's kind of been feeding these queer books into the elderly book club so that Winnie's experiencing them, she does hand Winnie a middle grade book. And I ended up going with Almost Flying by Jake Arlo. I had a different book, and then by the time this book came out, I was like, I want something a little bit more recent, and I wanted her to be able to trace the Stonewall sticker on the book. So that's why I chose that one. And then the other books that I have in there, I have a couple that aren't. She mentioned she talks about a Kate DiCamillo book, because I love Kate DiCamillo's middle grade books. And she mentions Holes, because both Winnie and my first fictional crush was kissing Kate Barlow from Holes. So that's kind of like why and how I ended up including all the books that I did. How about in Murray?
I included a bunch of like my sneaker favorites, like definitely like product placement to extent. Like if you like Murray, you might like these like 8 other books that Murray's reading. A big part of it, so Murray's mom is like a very like strict Catholic who cares a lot about appearances. Like she's like probably a narcissist in some capacity. Like there's like a lot of toxic family dynamics going on with the parents. And as I was writing it, a lot of the book banning stuff started coming up, and a lot of stuff where it's like, oh, like these books are gonna like make people queer. And it's like Murray was always queer from the beginning. Like the books did not make her gay. The books helped her like get through it and like process herself and like just find
I'm
entertainment.
just like picturing Murray's mom like at one of those board meetings. Get these books out of my child's classroom kind of thing.
And she does, she sneaks books home from like her school library, like, and then she meets her cousin who has like all these books, and it's like a whole new world for her where she has like so much more access to them. There's even one point where she's reading Please Ignore Vera Dietz by A.S. King, and her mom gets really mad at her for like reading something she didn't approve of, and she takes the book away, and then the aunt like is like no, and then like comes back with the book and gives it back to her. So I really wanted to like play with that idea of like books help kids process their reality and provide like a safe space. So it was less about the actual individual books that I mentioned and more just about the books being there at all.
Yeah.
Because I don't think to the book banners it really matters what books these are. It's just that the books exist
Yeah.
to begin with.
Yeah. And I think it's just really interesting that for both of us, it was just a way to just have them process and not feel so alone. And I think that's why we do what we do
Yes.
in general. So any other questions from the audience? Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you're like, I wish you did?
I don't think so, but I think you could talk about Winnie because I think a lot of people who came here from Murray would also love that.
Well, we can chat. So, I want to try and like twist this so we can talk about both at the same time. Winnie also takes place at the Jersey Shore, which Taylor and I have in common. We both love the beach, love the Jersey Beach in particular. That's all my books are set where I live, and so Winnie is in Seabright for the summer, which was actually really impacted by Hurricane Sandy back in the day. I know that Sandy isn't the hurricane that happens in Murray.
Some people think it is though, and it's popped up in reviews, and like I just have not figured out like a gentle way. So like this is a PSA. It is not Sandy. All I read, Murray talks about Sandy.
See, I know. I'm sure Jersey people know. This is a different hurricane because they are going to be cropping up with global changes. But yeah, so Winnie is staying at the shore with her grandmother for the summer. Her mom is just coming out of a pretty big depression. She has been struggling with miscarriages and is currently pregnant again. So Winnie's mom and dad are kind of like figuring things out at home and kind of shuffle Winnie away so that, Winnie can enjoy her summer and they can sort things out. But before she goes, her dad tells her, don't tell your grandma anything about your mom's depression, and don't talk about, don't bring up the fact that you're gay to your grandma. So she's been, pretty much for Winnie, the whole thing is that she's basically kind of has to keep everything in. A big theme in the book is that, both her grandma and her dad basically are like, what happens in the home stays in the home. And that was kind of a mantra when I was growing up, and it makes her feel even more isolated because she doesn't feel like she's allowed to talk about things when she needs to. And she ends up really wanting to basically run away to go to New York City Pride. That is kind of her end goal because she just really wants a sense of community. She wants to feel held. That's pretty much her whole thing. So she wants to feel held, and she thinks that to get to New York City Pride, they'll do that. So that is Winnie in a nutshell. I thought that we have our two little, queer beach babies.
Yeah. Although Winnie did not want to go swimming at all.
No, Winnie did not. Winnie is very anti a lot of things because she's just very like frustrated. So she's like, I hate the water. I hate being here. Why am I here? Oh, the water's terrible. Which is very not me. So it was fun to write a character who hates the ocean. Or thinks she, or she's just being antagonistic, I think for Winnie, it's a little bit both. Whereas, Murray is, it's funny that they're both being torn away from their homes, but one is sent to the beach and the other is sent away from the beach, but, they pair really nice, actually, the more I sit and think about it. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
So you both have autobiographical elements in your books from what I've heard and what I know, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you draw that line of what to include and what to change, and where your ideas happen to work for both of you.
Yeah.
Sure. So Marie's family is definitely not my family. I'm an only child and we are not Catholic. It was really more of like thinking about the culture like around Seaside. And I think there's a ton of books about kids growing up in like more rural and red parts of the country. And then like there's this really tough divide between red and blue states. And I think we have to remember that like, there's blue areas in red states and red areas in blue states. So like what's it like for Murray growing up in this like very conservative part of New Jersey, where she's probably not going to have access to a lot of the wonderful resources in other parts of the state, and thinking about what that means for her and her family and her relationships and so forth. I always knew I was going to write a book about like a Hurricane Sandy inspired event. So I didn't want to write about Sandy specifically. I was a senior when Hurricane Sandy happened, and the horror of having to write a YA about like a kid trying to get college applications in when like a hurricane is like impending, I was like, no. I really loved middle grade, and I think it's a great, another great transition point to kind of like write about kids going through climate change during that time. So that's what drew me to use the inspiration for that time period. And another autobiographical element of the book that is very fun is that I really did love Boy Genius as much as Murray does throughout the book. And like getting to weave that kind of musical element into it was a great way to kind of bring in like my own interest. So I think it definitely reflects me while I was writing and editing it very well.
You know, Winnie was interesting because, I wanted to write about that feeling about being a beach kid and seeing New York City across the bay and just kind of like yearning for that. Because I grew up in, you know, the red county. I went to Catholic school. And for us growing up, and not just, I feel like my whole, like everyone I grew up with, the thing was like, I'm gonna get out of here and get to the city. Because that's what we stared at like all the time. And everything will be perfect there, right? Like that was kind of so that's kind of what I wanted to really give Winnie. And then it was hard, but I wanted to tackle a book that talked about miscarriages and what it's like for the kid already around. My mom had a lot of miscarriages. I was a lot younger than Winnie, so I wasn't personally impacted as much, but it was a big part of, you know, our story as a family. And then I ended up publishing my fourth book, The Science of Being Angry, before Winnie, but I had Winnie finished first. It wasn't the right time for a couple of reasons. One, the book before that, How to Become a Plant, it's also really sad, and I didn't really want two like really sad books back to back. But then I had a cousin of mine had a pretty bad a stillbirth actually, and it just didn't feel like the right time. And then to think about, well, how do I get all these feelings on the page in a way that's respectful? Because my mom's not the only, my cousin's not the, like, this is something that impacts a lot of families, and I really wanted that in a book. So it was actually really hard to figure out how to do it and do it right, but that's kind of what I drew from and how I tried to do it. So it was a big thing for me.
I think with autobiography, it's like you put elements into like a blender and it comes out like different.
Yeah.
Or it's like, it's
Yeah.
not an A to A input, it's like A to like B plus C plus.
And then it's funny too, because I feel like, so In the Role of Brie Hutchins is probably my most personal book. But I had one of my professors at school from grad school read Winnie and says that she thinks Winnie is the most me book. And I didn't feel that way about it. So I think it's interesting too, like how much you end up putting yourself into a book that maybe you don't even realize sometimes. And I definitely get that sense with Winnie. So what's next?
So I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about book 2 because
I always just talk about things anyway.
But I will say it's gonna be prose. It is a remix of Romeo and Juliet that takes place at the San Gennaro Festival about the daughters of rival restaurant owners in Liverpool. But one is from New Jersey and lives in Verona. She may or may not get banished to Mantua, New Jersey at one point in the book. And it's very fun, and I had a lot of fun playing with Romeo and Juliet as a text and getting frustrated with a lot of the adaptations and really trying to focus on what this would look like in 2024, 2025 with actual 13 and 14-year-old protagonists, but still focusing on like community and agency and of course food, which isn't in Romeo and Juliet, but you can't not do that with San Gennaro Festival.
I know you won't be able to tell us because it's the ending, but I was actually, before we came, Liz and I were watching Romeo and Juliet, because it was on TV. And they're these like, it's a cartoon with these gnomes and it's basically Romeo and Juliet, but they're gnomes. And we were like, we kind of were sitting, we didn't get to watch the end, so I don't know how it ends, but we kept going like, how is this ending? Are they gonna kill these gnomes? Like, I'm really concerned. So like, when you're doing it at like a loose, even a loose adaptation like that, you gotta think about like, you know, you can't kill these, I mean, I guess you can, but I hope you don't.
No, I think like, I read Kate Fussner's The Song of Us, and I think she handled the end of
Oh,
the Orpheus and Eurydice myth very well. I will say it's a joyful remix. The ending is more Anne Juliet than William Shakespeare.
Okay. Nice, nice. Yeah, so that's exciting, and that's next year?
That is next year at some point. And I'm
Nice.
also working on a YA project and a few other things. So
Nice. So
hopefully
this-
more things for me.
So this
soon.
is the first, but not the last.
Hopefully.
Should we sign some books?
Sure, let's do it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you,
Thank
Nicole.
you.
Congratulations on getting
Thank
your
you
first
so
book out.
much.
And thanks to everyone who joined us on